Welcome to the Boomer Briefing podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm Jim Boomer, CEO of BoomerConsulting, and beside me here today, John Hubbard, Chief Growth Officer at BoomerConsulting. Welcome, John.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is great. We're on site here at Summit 2023. Pretty exciting. Usually we're doing these over Zoom, so it's good to do it side by side here. So our focus here today is on the 2023 trends around the growth pillar. And so we work together as all our consultants to come up with these collaboratively. And I know this is the area where it's John's expertise as CGO. So John, why don't you kind of go through where we ended up earlier in the year with the 5 trends in the area of growth, and we can have a little chat about it.
Sure. Thanks, Jim. I think the first one is one of the larger trends in growth, and we're calling that revenue replacement, which simply is, how does your firm, as you look to grow over the next 5, 10, 15 years, how do you start to replace non-fit revenue with right fit revenue? You know, the conversation around client filtering has been one for 10, 15, 20 years. On that, we're changing the conversation. It's not just about client filtering as it is around revenue replacement. So when we talk about non-fit revenue, that is simply the revenue that firms, maybe they appreciate having today, maybe they appreciate having in the past, but as they look to the future, they think this really isn't an area that we want to grow in. So how do we, even before we let that revenue go, how do we develop a strategy to replace it with more attractive revenue? And ultimately, as firms go through this process and as they think about it, not only should that revenue be more attractive, but it should also result in increased capacity for your team. I know some firms that have went through this strategy process and they're able to replace 1,200 non-fit clients with 50 right fit clients. That's how firms start to get capacity. Jim, what are you seeing with this topic?
Well, I'll say, John, you kind of got the lead on reframing this conversation, and I would argue it's more than 20 years. But, you know, firms are really good at grading their clients, but when it comes to actually doing the filtering, there's inaction, and there's a lot of real reasons, the emotion, the relationships, all of the stuff, but also, you know, you said 1,200 clients. Well, if we look at each of those and they're a wrong fit, it's easy to go, yeah, no, we shouldn't be serving that. But when you got 1,200 times that, on the aggregate, that's a big chunk of revenue. And I think a hang up is, how are we going to replace that? So when you do this little shift in your mindset, you put yourself in a position of strength of you've already got the plan, you already have your plan for how you're going to replace that revenue and beyond, rather than creating a position of reaction where you're like, oh my gosh, we just cut $1 million worth of revenue. How are we going to replace that from day one? And so I really, you know, in rooms where I talk about this, you see people go, yeah, I like that revenue replacement term much more than I do client filtering. So I think it's spot on.
Nice. All right, so the second trend, and we call this one a couple different things, but what we're going with today is positioning the relationship to the client or to the prospect, right? For too long, I think our profession has fallen into the trap sometimes of being order takers. We let the client come in, tell us what they need, we quote a price by the hour or something, and we say, yep, we can do that. But we actually miss opportunity to position our firm in the correct way to those prospects and clients. And so what are some elements of going ahead and positioning your firm correctly or in a really strategic way? Things like positioning your firm as a team. Maybe someone just knows you, Jim, but it's all about you positioning me and the rest of the team in that relationship. It's also really positioning to the prospect that they may come into the door with a compliance-based need, but how do we turn that need into advisory and consulting? And so one key way we see firms actually gaining traction in this area is developing 3 core packages of services that they can use on the front end of the client relationship, not just in the proposal process, but actually on the front end of the client relationship, to be able to answer the question, so how do you work with organizations such as ours? Well, let's talk through that and we can see what's relevant to your needs. And they bring up 3 core packages and they have a dialogue. And they're seeing that when we do that, the prospect or even the current client starts to view us differently. They don't know what they don't know about what our firm can do, what problems we can solve for them. But once we start to have that larger conversation, we're seeing firms or clients use more services for each firm. Are you seeing the same?
100%. I mean, what you're talking about is really positioning yourself as a leader of that conversation rather than just a participant and the order taker, you know. And so if you can guide them towards a higher value conversation, and the thing I'll say though is, I think there were a lot of bad things about the pandemic and that time, but I will say one of the silver linings is that a lot of CPAs and accountants got some practice of talking about something other than just reporting back what are the numbers from on the tax return or the audit results, or being that order taker. It was about, you know, where are your struggles? Where are your opportunities? How can we help your business not only survive, but thrive? So people got practice. We can't let that just go by the wayside and grow stale. Those skills tie into exactly what you're talking about. And so lead the conversation. Don't just let it go wherever the client takes it.
Absolutely. And you know, often we hear firms say, we want our clients to do more with us. We want to change the relationship. And we would say, if you want to change the relationship, change the conversations that you're actually having with them on the front end. All right, so the third trend is around artificial intelligence and specifically within the area of marketing operations. Right? I think within our industry, when you talk about artificial intelligence, sometimes people go directly to certain areas of the firm and they skip right over marketing. Well, marketing is all about getting your brand, your firm into the minds, into the eyes of prospects and clients. And there's some really neat tools coming out in the area of artificial intelligence. Specifically, ChatGPT. This is not the first time you're going to be hearing about it here, obviously. But in our marketing circle, which is a really mastermind group of CMOs, chief marketing officers of top 100 firms and larger firms, every single firm is leveraging ChatGPT, leveraging AI to be able to improve the process of how they create content. Now, no one's trusting exactly what comes out of ChatGPT, so it's just one piece in the process there, and we always recommend having an expert human review any content going out the door. But I can point to dozens of firms that say our content creation process is more efficient, more effective than it has ever been. Jim, what are you seeing with artificial intelligence?
Well, I mean, I think you did a perfect job of framing it up from the growth pillar perspective, but I'll say this one hits all 5 pillars of leadership, talent, technology, process, and growth. It's going to have impacts everywhere, and so not only I agree, we're hearing that from the content creation, content marketing. But we're seeing IT professionals see opportunities to build policies, to even do coding. And so there's a lot of opportunity here. There is also the side, you said trust, but there's risk that we need to be having conversations about now. We deal with a lot of PII, you know, what can you put out there? Can we create a private instance? And some firms are well along the way in that path. And then there's the ethical side of it too, you know, that often doesn't get talked about, but is there an inherent bias built into some of these tools? And even if it's leveraging information out on the internet from years and years, you know, is there built-in bias? And there's some ethical things that we need to, need to be talking about. And so I think the main thing is we don't have this all figured out on the trust, on the risk, on the ethics, but we need to be starting those conversations now, and we need to be understanding how this all works. So you may have to do it outside of your private information and your firm's information, but go encourage your people to start playing with this and using it in different ways, so when it does hit, which it's going to hit faster than probably any of us think, your people are ready, and they just haven't had their head in the sand, and then they're like, what is this that's coming at you fast? So it's certainly something that's going to have an impact on our profession and all of us individually too.
Yeah, and we would really encourage you, a lot of firms have a bit of a wait and see. How is this technology going to impact our firm? Not just the marketing department or the growth area, but as Jim's point, all areas. One thing we would say is to not wait and see on is getting some sort of basic guidelines out for your firm, right? We may know, or you may know, that not to put private client information into ChatGPT. Others in the firm may not know that. They may not understand the technology. So I think many firms are really getting some basic guidelines out to their firm. It's not perfect, and it's not all inclusive of every possible iteration of AI, but it is saying, hey, if you're going to be using tools like ChatGPT, do not put personal client information in there. And before you publish something, whether that's on the website, social media, in email communication, if it's generated by ChatGPT or a similar program, have a human review it too. So that's just something we're seeing. All right, trend 4, growth leadership in the C-suite. Now, I mentioned in just a few minutes ago around the marketing and business development circle, that mastermind peer group for the top of marketing and growth within the larger firms. That program started about 4 or 5 years ago. And what's really fun is today, most of the people in the room now have the title chief in front of their name. 4 or 5 years ago, that wasn't the case, right? So we are seeing the kind of the roles of chief marketing officers or chief growth officers actually starting to bubble up in firms, and firms are looking at each other saying, we need a chief leader in those areas. No longer can every single growth decision be made by a collective partner group. We need someone that can bring those strategies to us. We need someone that can actually make some decisions in that top executive level. So it's really fun for us to see the rise of the CMO and the rise of the CGO. Jim, anything you would add?
Well, I think like the last trend, this is one that goes across the whole firm, and we've been in this profession, we've been talking about moving to more of a corporate governance model where it isn't just the partners, which oftentimes that means a bunch of CPAs making the decision for the path forward in areas of marketing and business development, in areas of IT, in areas of talent. And so, yes, CMOs, CGOs need to have a seat at the table, but so do CIOs and CHROs and all your functional leaders. You look at the Fortune 500, how many of those have their C-suite 100% CPAs? None. It is truly make
sure that we have some sort of mechanism internally that is making pricing a center of excellence. Now, this may be a bit shocking to say, but just because someone is qualified to deliver a service does not mean they are the end-all be-all pricer of that service, right? And something we often say as well is Jim would actually price me a bit higher than I would probably price myself, right? And vice versa. And there's some psychology, some, of course, emotions around pricing, but firms are putting together things like value committees or pricing committees. If a deal hits a certain threshold, let's make sure it gets in front of a team, not to micromanage it, but to capture the learnings from it. So when the next deal comes in from the next office or from the next department, we're able to actually take learnings from previous pricing decisions and apply them moving forward, okay? things like how do we start to raise fees, or how do we at least start to do it consistently, and can we provide some data that makes some of those decisions a bit more comfortable and a bit less haphazard. So firms are really starting to push in this area. It's been a really fun year for this trend because pretty much every firm I've been in has ended up prioritizing this function. And part of it has to do, there's really not a firm out there that says we just need a lot more clients. They say we need more of the right type of clients, and we need to make sure we're pricing them correctly. Jim, anything you would add?
I'll be quick on this one. I think the only thing is it's so closely aligned with, this is a piece of your revenue replacement strategy. If you start pricing your services and positioning them at the level of value and pricing them right, you start to take care of some of your revenue replacement strategy to make you comfortable to actually pull the trigger on creating the capacity when you get rid of some of your wrong fit clients to be able to serve more of those right fit. So
Right.
yeah, pricing is so important, and you're so right. Like if we get it out of our own hands, people are going to price us higher. They're going to move things along faster. We aren't the bottleneck. All of those positives that happen. So centralizing a lot of these functions makes a lot of sense and has very positive results.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just real quick here as we kind of wrap up this episode, any big things that you've seen change throughout 2023? What are you looking towards in 24?
Yeah, so one trend I will touch on, and it's actually part of the revenue replacement strategy. We didn't get a chance to unpack that and all the details because this isn't the episode for that. But one thing I will touch on is around defining target clients. I think firms historically have had or didn't have the luxury of having to really define their target clients. They could just take who kind of walks in the door. They could work hard to maybe maximize value for them, but they always had capacity to be able to take on all types of clients that come in the door. Well, there's not a firm today, at least one that we've been in, that feels like they don't have that anymore. They need to define their target clients. We cannot grow in every single area that we want with every single type of client out there. So we need to define our target client. And maybe that's an industry, maybe that's a niche, maybe it's a few of those, but we need to get smarter around our growth, and let's prioritize investing proactively in growing in those types of clients. And let's let the growth of our target clients back us into some decisions around non-fit clients. So we fully anticipate in 2024 that really being doubled down on.
All right, this has been great, John. It's always great to actually have an in-person conversation versus screen to screen. So I've enjoyed this, and since I kicked us off, why don't you close us out here?
Absolutely. So as always, we really love that you listen to this podcast, and we release new episodes every Tuesday morning. Now, this conversation obviously was around growth, but as Jim mentioned, we covered the 5 pillars: leadership, talent, technology, and process as well. But the common theme among all of those topics is that they are critical to your firm's success. So please go ahead and subscribe, and thanks again for listening.